Okay, Matthew, just carry on with that from part one, please.
So you've got the anti-money laundering, and then the responsible gaming aspect, which is where I suppose more the open banking, and is open banking a solution question here, is the other aspect. But the reality is that ever since it became the bookmaker's responsibility to be responsible for people who are suffering with gambling addiction, then you put a price because there's a fine associated with it. So the moment there is a price on it, bookmakers have to evaluate, it suddenly becomes a potential cost in the business plan. So they have to put into place ways to avoid, receiving that fine. Let's be honest, all bookmakers want to create as frictionless process as possible. Certainly on the way in, I know people will be saying getting your money in, not having anyone interfere with how you enjoy the product, that is purely in the bookmaker's interest. So the question is, if you're someone who's obsessing over, I deposited £500, I'm withdrawing £2,000 because I've won, and I'm getting all these checks, that is to me, that is just simply obvious that there is going to be extra checks. Now, you're saying, okay, well, why do I have to send bank statements to prove all these things? And it's like, well, you've literally you've stepped over the line into this net where you have put money into one institution, you're getting more money out with no visible transferable goods or services other than the service of the entertainment of the bookmaker. And people think well, bookmaking's different. And it's like, well, people hate making exceptions for industries or anything like that. It's not easy. You want to keep things neat and clean. So at this point, how are you going to prove that, this money flow is sensible? Now you may say it's up to the bookmaker to prove, that, or it's up to the bank to prove. It's not up to me to send these, banking forms in. Ultimately, these have been implemented poorly. Everyone says ideally the check would happen on the way in, and then once you're verified, proof of funds, blah, 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 the money should be able to go back and forward. That's one possibility. You create that much friction to deposit into a bookmaker, many bookmakers are just going to die, at which point then there'll be more mass consolidation to the only bookmakers who can actually smooth that process. Eventually everyone in the UK can only open a bookmaking account with a bookmaker that has basically smoothed that process as much as possible. To be honest, it's almost impossible for me to articulate all the different, but one thing I noticed, so literally on Nick Luck the other day, saw Neil Channing talking about open banking, etc. And this idea that bookmakers having access to my bank transactions, my banking information. I think people will be surprised how much of their own personal information is available universally everywhere. But the reality is that we will, I firmly believe, get to the point where third-party entities provide basically a checkbox flag, good, bad, medium kind of scenario. And therefore, if the bookmaker only has access to the third party's past information as to whether, yes, no, maybe, and they are well regulated and, the information is well guarded, if it's Experian, basically, if it's a proxy for your being approved for a credit card, and that's how the open banking is used, the open banking access is given to this third party who's well regulated as opposed to the bookmaker. So the third party's only interest is in protecting their customer, the bookmaker, and you as an entity. Yes,
I've got a scenario for you. And this is what happens a lot, for what I've been told. When I came in here today, you were putting that 50 quid ACCA on for the placement. You said you didn't have any cash on you. If I'd said to you, here you go, Matthew, here's a nifty, send it back to me later when you get home. Today I've also done a silly Yankee. If that silly Yankee comes up and I get a life-changing amount of money, that bookmaker's likely to say, we need to look at your bank account. They see that Matthew TRENHAILE has put 50 quid in my account, they're quite likely to say, wasn't your bet. We're not having it and we're keeping everything as well. That's what has been happening. This is what people are getting upset about, that the bookmakers are using the information they can glean to basically welsh on you. And there's loads of stories like that. So, I mean, what about that aspect of it?
Okay, so at which point At which point, you're going to get into this situation where you've got to prove our relationship, why the money's transferred, etc. And that is protracted. Bookmaking teams have probably not dedicated much staff to resolving these fast. You could be stuck in purgatory for 6 months, a year, who knows. So that's a problem in terms of how much effort is applied by bookmakers to solving genuine scenarios. Will bookmakers ever put huge effort into the making sure that there's no welshing on legitimate cases? It's not going to be a well-funded department ever in a bookmaker, I would argue.
But do you think that there definitely is, in certain circumstances, the bookmakers are using their powers to not pay if they can?
So I would say that at any given time, bookmakers are under, lots of people who are multi-accounting and lots of people who are potentially doing anything from various, card deposit fraud methods to, you name it. Genuine shrewd people who are just winning because they're shrewd, people trying to abuse things, all sorts of things. So there's a myriad of problems going on, and people getting welshed on because they have a pattern that is a corresponding pattern to other behavior that genuinely the bookmaker believes because of their terms and conditions they shouldn't have to pay out on, then that's going to happen, or literally there will be friendly fire hits all the time. And the reality is that are they incentivized to stop friendly fire hits? Well, no, because it prevents money going out the door. So will these things continue to happen? Yes. You say you've heard lots of stories. It's tired, but bookmakers will always fall back on, well, Bet365 got 1 million customers. If 0.1% or less of my customers are having these issues, then that already makes me better than 99.9% of customers in other businesses, like who, where they have maybe only 80% customer satisfaction or whatever it may be. So it's kind of like, I think they will routinely sort of fall back on the vast majority of customers have no complaints. But yeah, no, it's at the end of the day, I think to Hannon's razor, like never assume maliciousness when there's, when incompetency is, lack of competency is the explanation. Invariably, someone will be someone will have like a step-by-step. This has been flagged. Almost never flagged by traders. That's one thing you can almost for 100% assume. These things are never flagged by traders. What's happened is someone goes to withdraw large amount of money. That amount of money is a net loss to the bookmaker because they deposited X, withdrawing Y. Let's investigate. Goes into investigation, procedural workflow. Go through, does it look like X? Well, it does meet these criteria. Does it do this? What was the method of deposit? Blah, 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 And so you're going to get to this point where some of that filtering process, which has been done for ease, like COVID GCSE result algorithms, whatever solution you come up with that sort of you think's correct algorithmically, will inevitably catch some people who should just be paid. Is that right? Is that wrong? Like, should people invest more into doing that? Should there be a legitimate way for punters to really be able to question that? Is IBAS completely toothless? Is the Gambling Commission toothless with regards to these things? But then, creating a really strong, robust organization to invest, to investigate an incredibly small percentage in real terms of withdrawals from bookmakers. Commercially, these things sometimes just don't stack up. So, did someone deliberately say this person, had a load of bad each ways, and that's why we're not paying them? Nothing from my experience of bookmakers says that goes on. Do people observe? Does AML officer Y look through all these withdrawals and say 99.9% of our customers lose money? This person hasn't lost money. That in itself is anomalous. I better put this into the heavy investigation purgatory category, and it will take that person. We will make sure that person only gets paid if they've proved all 99 points on the checklist. quite possibly. Is that good? Probably not. But
Okay, now moving on from that subject, you've worked for a firm that takes on everybody, Pinnacle. Has a restriction route that UK bookmakers have taken, is it just been the easy option for them?
I think that we sort of crossed the line in that once upon a time it was perceived to be an easier solution. So I went through a period where, the Bet365, was called Bet £3.65, and and this is going back to the early, 2000s, and what we have is that a bookmaker that became extraordinarily successful, and people look to attribute their success to different things, and it was seen very obviously that one of the things they did was restrict winners very fast, very quickly. So that then becomes part of the blueprint. So people are very quick to try and play catch up, and if that's considered part of the successful blueprint, they're going to copy that over. So that's part of it. This then basically allows, bookmakers to, maintain a high margin by getting rid of people who would reduce the margin. This then, as they look to be making more profits, people who supply services to bookmakers, banks who do processing, all these things, they see bookmakers as an easy way to make money. And, these businesses are invariably cash rich, next to no debt a lot of the time, certainly historically. And so you get into this situation whereby you need to maintain a certain amount of margin. The cost of taking a bet in terms of pennies on the pound goes up. So once upon a time, any customer that lost money essentially was a winner to you. Then you get to the point where a customer needs to be losing at least 1%, then 2%, then 3%. Then you add, streaming services to your website. Then the data rights go up. Then so eventually you get to the point where just taking a £1 bet from a customer will cost you 3-4p in the pound. And if you're betting 10 to 11 aside on two-way outcome, that's already a good chunk of it. So then you can get to this point where your single bets almost feel like break even. And so then it's a case of, well, I'm now only making money out of multiples or special, high margin bets. And so I'm going to build more products like that create high margin. And also I've got to make sure that I don't have too many customers that don't cover the affiliate fees, the banking fees, the new AML fees, the new regulation, all these other fees. So essentially the blueprint that came in, let's be quite clear, bookmakers since the dawn of time have refused business. Even in the old big heavy days, like, go back to the 1800s, art of legging, there would be people who you didn't do business with. In the ring, there would be definitely people who either you turned away, or B, you took the bet and you straight away went to lay it off all the way around the ring. Now, the inability to lay off bets has changed the bookmaker scenario a lot. In the 70s, you could actually move exposure down. You could almost distribute shrewd exposure across the industry. Like, look at the massive Australian rings of the 70s, 80s. Invariably, there was a bookmaker with the deepest pockets who could afford to soak up some of the shrewd money, and there were small people who could, do that. So, the inability to disperse exposure throughout the industry, plus the possibly wrongly attributed, the success of Bet365 is went online, had a great product, but everyone else saw the restricting as being a major factor. And then now we've got a point where services to bookmakers have gone up so much that they have to hold so much higher in order to have a really good sustainable business.